She was just a black nurse clocking out after a 14-hour shift, until she heard a newborn screaming in the incineration room. No one else claimed to hear it. Security told her she was imagining things again. But when she broke protocol and opened the door, what she found wasn't trash, it was a breathing infant, tagged as deceased. The birth record said, stillborn, no relatives. But the baby had her last name. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The delivery suite of Westbridge Memorial Hospital was bathed in sterile silence, save for the soft, muffled cries of a newborn. Nurses moved like shadows, whispering orders, typing in charts, avoiding eye contact. As the tension thickened, something was off, deeply off, but no one said a word. Not with him in the room. Charles Whitmore stood tall in his charcoal gray Brioni suit, untouched by the fluids and flurry that surrounded the birth of his only son. His eyes were fixed on the infant, swaddled and unnaturally quiet, cradled in the arms of a nurse whose hands trembled slightly under the weight of more than the child. "Congratulations, Mr. Whitmore," said Dr. Allen, forcing a smile. "A healthy baby boy." But he wasn't healthy. Not exactly. The child had failed both APGR vision assessments. He didn't flinch when the light hit his face. No blink reflex. No tracking. His pupils remained eerily fixed, clouded by a dull sheen. "He's blind," whispered a black nurse under her breath. Her name tag read Shonda Wells, and her voice carried barely past her lips. "We need to run more tests." Dr. Allen cut her off. "We don't need to worry the parents unnecessarily. Close the file, flag it for later evaluation." "But sir, the optic reflex scan." "That's enough, Nurse Wells." She swallowed her protest. She knew the rules, especially in rooms like this, where billionaires brought their own laws. The silence returned. This time darker, heavier. A different kind of cry filled the room, not from the baby, but from the mother. Linda Whitmore lay pale and stone still, staring at the ceiling as if none of this concerned her. Her lips moved only once, mouthing something incomprehensible. Not a question, not a greeting, just detachment. Charles, on the other hand, nodded at the attending staff like a CEO signing off an acquisition. "My son is perfect," he declared. No. Downstairs, past the maternity wing, and into the bowels of the hospital. Ruthann Thomas swiped her ID badge and pushed open the service entrance to the waste room. The industrial cleaner roared to life. The air reeked of bleach and bureaucracy. She didn't wear a white coat. No stethoscope. Just a faded maroon uniform. A mop, and a quietness that made her invisible in the building she'd cleaned for 12 years. But Ruthann noticed everything. And that day, as she emptied the biohazard bin from the labor and delivery floor, something unusual caught her eye. A chart labeled Whitmore, baby boy, do not process. It had a red slash across the top, and a handwritten note, pending PR clearance. Whole. PR clearance? She muttered. That wasn't standard hospital code. She flipped through the pages. APGR scores were missing. So was the vision screening log, normally stapled behind the vitals. But there was no vision test here. Just a signed NDA attached, addressed to the attending nurse, Shonda Wells. Her heart pounded. This wasn't the first time she'd seen a file disappear, but it was the first time she recognized the surname, Whitmore, a name she'd heard for years in board meetings, in donations, in news clips, about downtown gentrification. Charles Whitmore owned buildings, hospitals, judges, maybe even this silence. She tucked the folder under her jacket, just for the night. That evening, Ruthann sat at the kitchen table of her modest apartment, the file spread out before her like a crime scene. She didn't pretend to understand all the medical jargon, but she knew enough to know what was missing. There were protocols for newborn blindness, tests, reports, plans. None of them were here. Instead, there was a post-it. "Optics are everything, D. Hartford." Danica Hartford was the hospital's PR director. Ruthann had cleaned her office. She remembered the leather-bound chair, the framed quote on the wall. "Control the story, control the truth." Her fingers hovered over the paper, then froze. Because there, tucked in the corner of the chart, was a familiar name. Not Whitmore. Not the doctor's. Thomas. Ruthann. She blinked. Pulled it closer. It was on a transfer slip. Dated 10 years ago. Connected to a birth. A stillbirth. Her stomach dropped. 10 years ago, she had lost her baby in this same hospital. She had arrived alone, contractions coming too fast. Too soon. They told her the baby never made it out alive. They offered her a room far from the maternity wing. No visitors. No paperwork. She'd asked to see her daughter's body. They told her it wasn't advisable. And she'd believed them. Until now. Ruth Ann didn't sleep that night. She sat in the glow of the kitchen light, staring at the Whitmore baby's file, and her own name buried inside it. Her breath shallow, her eyes burning. What was her name doing there? She thought back to the delivery nurse that night. A white woman with tight blonde curls and a soft voice who had never met her eyes. She remembered how she'd been moved rooms 3 times in one night. How no one had ever let her hold her daughter. And now this. There was a knock at the door. Ruth Ann jumped. It was her landlord. "You got a new job offer, huh?" he asked, holding a letter. Came from the Whitmore estate. Hand-delivered. Said urgent. She opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a formal offer of employment. Live-in housekeeper. Triple her current pay. Immediate start. No interview. There was a note at the bottom. "You come highly recommended. We trust your silence. CW." She sat frozen for minutes, then slowly folded the letter and placed it next to the medical file. She knew what this was. A payoff. A test. An invitation into the lion's den. But also, maybe a chance. If she took the job, she'd be inside the house. Close to the baby. Close to answers. She thought of the child's still, silent face. Of the clouded eyes that didn't match Charles's sharp blue gaze. Then she thought of her own daughter. The one she never got to hold. Something twisted in her gut. The next morning, Ruth Ann showed up at the Whitmore estate, with nothing but her worn brown suitcase and a spine of quiet fury. The gates opened without a question. Inside, everything gleamed. Marble floors, gold trim, silence deeper than luxury. Mrs. Whitmore didn't greet her. A manager named Griffin handed her a schedule. "You'll have access to the nursery," he said flatly. "But no photos, no calls. Discretion is why you were chosen." Ruth Ann nodded. She didn't trust her voice yet. The nursery was on the 2nd floor. She opened the door slowly, half expecting a security guard. Instead, she saw the baby, asleep in a crib too large, beneath a mobile that didn't spin. The same clouded eyes. The same unnatural stillness. But then, as she stepped forward, the baby's eyes moved. Not randomly. Not vaguely. They tracked her hand. Back and forth. Deliberate. Curious. She stopped. So did the baby. Then, slowly, he smiled. Ruth Ann isn't just a maid. She once had a baby taken from her at the same hospital. The Whitmore estate stretched across 6 manicured acres, just outside of Atlanta. A compound wrapped in walls of hedged perfection, and watched by a private security detail that wore smiles colder than steel. Ruth Ann had only ever seen the place from the highway. Once, on a bus ride to a second cleaning job, she'd stared out the window and wondered what kind of people needed gates that high and windows that clean. Now, she lived behind them. The mansion itself felt like a museum. Glass, marble, and silence. Cameras blinked softly in the corners of every hallway, every stairwell, every shared space. The walls were white and cold. Paintings stared down from impossible heights. Everything smelled like citrus and money. No one greeted her when she arrived. Her room was at the far end of the west wing, past the staff entrance, down a hallway with worn carpets and locked doors. There were no pictures on the walls there, just a mirror she tried not to look into. The staff barely spoke. They had their own hierarchy, and Ruth Ann came in below the kitchen help, somewhere between laundry and landscaping. She was told to wear plain clothes, no jewelry, no perfume, no question. Her duties were outlined in a white folder with black tabs: bedrooms, hallways, private nursery, and one rule in bold: do not enter the main dining area, unless summoned. She never was. On her 3rd day, Ruth Ann was scrubbing baseboards near the grand staircase when she first saw Glenda Whitmore in motion. The woman floated down the stairs like fog, dressed in a pale linen robe, eyes hidden behind thick sunglasses, even indoors. Her hair was perfectly undone, the kind of effortless that cost thousands. Glenda walked past Ruth Ann without a glance, her phone pressed to one ear, whispering something about brand damage and strategic silence. That was the routine. No eye contact. No words. Just instructions left on folded notes. Rooms that had to be cleaned twice, because we're expecting photographers. Dishes she wasn't allowed to touch because those were imported. Rooms she was never supposed to see, but often did, just long enough to know she shouldn't. The baby's room was different. No camera in the ceiling. No monitoring screen. By the door, just an old-fashioned brass key and a cleaning schedule that always seemed vague. Ruth Ann noticed that the schedule never overlapped with anyone else. No nurse, no Glenda, no visitors. The room was always cleaned at noon, just after the baby's bottle, just before his second nap. She also noticed something else. When she entered, the baby never cried. He looked up, not randomly, not blindly, up toward her. At first she thought it was a coincidence. Maybe it was just habit, him reacting to sound, movement. She'd read about that. Blind babies could be responsive. They could laugh, gesture, coo. But this was different. It was the eyes. He followed her. Not always. Not when she moved quickly. Not when the light was dim. But when she walked past the window. When the sun cut sharp against the hardwood floor. He turned his head slowly and tracked the shape of her legs in shadow. Once, while changing the diaper bin, Ruth Ann leaned down and whispered, "You see that, don't you, little man?" The baby giggled. She began to test it. Subtle at first. She wore different colors each day. Bright yellow gloves, a turquoise scarf, a red headband. Each time, his pupils seemed to shift ever so slightly, like they were adjusting. Then came the spoon. She took a long-handled silver spoon from the back of a kitchen drawer and sat in the rocking chair across from the crib. She held the spoon upright, tilting it side to side. His head followed it, not his ears. His eyes. Then, as she slowly moved the spoon behind her back, his gaze snapped forward, like the curtain had dropped. Ruth Ann sat frozen, heart thudding. The next day, she tried again, this time with a feather duster. He tracked it in a smooth arc until it disappeared behind the dresser. Then he blinked, looked confused, and stared into empty space. As soon as the object was gone, the blindness returned, or was it an act? She started to document everything in a spiral notebook she kept beneath her mattress. A log of visual cues, reactions, patterns. But she didn't tell anyone, because no one asked her anything, and no one wanted her to speak. One evening, while wiping down the glass doors that opened onto the back veranda, Ruth Ann saw Charles Whitmore pacing by the pool. He wore a navy polo and khakis, his phone glued to his ear. "We can't afford a scandal," he was saying. "No, not after that Denver thing. Listen, I don't care what the specialist says. He's blind. End of story." He stopped and looked up at the camera above him, then added more quietly, "And if someone finds out otherwise, that's on you." Ruth Ann ducked back inside. The next day, during the baby's bath time, which Ruth Ann was suddenly instructed to assist with, something else strange happened. The baby reached for the soap, not by sound, not randomly. His tiny fingers moved straight toward the brightly colored bar of lavender soap, resting on the edge of the tub. He grabbed it with ease, not a fumble, not a misjudged swat. He held it up to his face and smiled. Ruth Ann felt a chill climb up her spine. "What the hell?" she whispered. She began checking the nursery more thoroughly, peeking into cabinets, under the crib, behind curtains. That's when she noticed something even more unsettling. The blinds were always closed, tightly. During the day, the room was cast in soft gray gloom. Even the nightlight bulb was a low-wattage amber. The mobile above the crib had no colors, just monochrome, plastic shapes. Who keeps a baby in the dark? Unless they're trying to preserve something, or hide it. At lunch that day, Ruth Ann passed by the staff break room, where two younger maids, both Latina, were whispering. "She got hired fast," one said. "Yeah, but you know why, right? They say the last nanny saw something she shouldn't have." Saw what? She was black too. Fired without warning. No severance. They fell silent when Ruth Ann stepped in. One gave her a look of pity. Not fear. Not suspicion. Just the look you give someone who's walking into traffic, without knowing it. The deeper she looked, the colder the house felt. Every corridor had glass windows. Every room had glass walls. Even the doors were glass paned. It was a house built to be watched, and yet the baby's room remained the only blind spot. And it was in that room, only in that room, that the baby saw. That night, as Ruth Ann leaned over to wipe down the crib railing, the baby looked straight at her. Not through her. At her. His head tilted. His eyes met hers. She raised one hand, fingers splayed, moving them slowly side to side like a wave. He tracked every movement. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. But just as she was about to say something, the door creaked open. She froze. Mrs. Whitmore stood there, in shadow, eyes unreadable behind her usual glasses. "You're done in here," she said flatly. Ruth Ann nodded and gathered her supplies. As she exited, she glanced back one last time. The baby was still watching her. But now his eyes had gone blank again. The baby tracks her hand with his eyes, but only when no one else is watching. By the fifth night, Ruth Ann had learned the rhythm of the Whitmore estate. Its heartbeat wasn't measured in seconds or footsteps, but in silences, shadows, and locks. Every evening at precisely 7 p.m., Nurse Janice would arrive in pressed scrubs with no hospital logo, wearing white gloves and soft shoes that barely made a sound on the marble floors. She walked with the authority of someone who wasn't just employed, but in bed. She never acknowledged Ruth Ann. No nod. No eye contact. Just a clipboard, a key, and the same words every night. "You can go." Ruth Ann would pretend to wipe down the baseboards just outside the nursery, delaying her departure by a minute or two. But it never mattered. The routine was sealed tighter than the baby's sleep schedule. Janice would enter. The door would click shut. The lock would turn from the inside. And for the next 8 hours the nursery was off limits. Not just to Ruth Ann, but to everyone. Ruth Ann began paying closer attention. The hallway camera pointed slightly away from the nursery door. A subtle blind spot she wouldn't have noticed before. The lock was old-fashioned brass, but the handle had a thumbprint scanner. She'd never seen that on a door before. Not in a house, and certainly not for a baby's room. Every morning, Janice would exit around 3:00 a.m., tired, but not in the way new mothers looked. There was no affection in her glance, no softness in her step. She moved like a technician, clean, clinical. Once, Ruth Ann asked gently, "How's the baby doing tonight?" Janice didn't answer. She just held up her index finger and pointed to the hallway ceiling. Ruth Ann followed the gesture and saw the red light of a camera blinking above. A silent reminder, you're always being watched, but there were things no camera could record. Every morning when Ruth Ann entered the nursery after Janice left, the baby was slightly different. One day his pupils seemed more dilated. The next he had a faint redness around his temples. Once his tiny hand had a puncture mark that vanished by evening. She documented it all in her notebook. Carefully, quietly. Then came the voices. One night while taking trash to the rear driveway bins, she passed the staff patio and heard a conversation through the cracked glass door. Janice was speaking to someone on a cell phone, voice low and tight. "No, stage 2 can't start yet. He's still reacting." "No," he smiled again. "I told you she's getting close. The maid, the black one. We need another reminder." Ruth Ann froze, one hand gripping the trash lid. "She asks too many questions." "You said she wouldn't." A pause. "Then, if she keeps pushing, we bring up the old file. That'll shut her down." Old file? Her breath caught. What file? What had they kept? She stayed crouched behind the bin until the patio door slid shut and Janice's footsteps disappeared down the hall. Inside her chest, a war began, between fear and fury. Days passed, but the questions only grew. Why lock the nursery from the inside? What were they doing at night? Why hide medical markings? Why silence reactions? And most importantly, what were they hiding from the baby? Then one night, it happened. A storm rolled through the estate just after sunset. Power flickered, the generator kicked in, and the rhythm of the house faltered just long enough to create confusion. Janice arrived late, distracted, rushed. Ruth Ann waited in her usual spot, heart hammering, pretending to dust the sconce outside the nursery door. Janice went in, but this time, the lock didn't click. Ruth Ann waited. 1 minute, 2, 5. No sound. She pressed her ear to the wood. Silence. Then a soft shuffle. A drawer closing. A whisper too faint to understand. She waited until her hands stopped trembling, then gently turned the knob. It opened. Inside, the room smelled different. Not like a nursery, but like antiseptic and metal. The baby was asleep, peaceful, his tiny chest rising and falling under a wool blanket. Janice wasn't in the room, but a small door in the back, one Ruth Ann had always assumed was a closet, stood slightly ajar. She crossed the room carefully. Every step felt like stepping into fire. She opened the door, and her breath left her. It wasn't a closet. It was a converted examination room, tucked inside a baby's bedroom. Steel counters, a sink, cabinets lined with vials, a locked mini fridge, medical tubing coiled like snakes, a tablet monitor left on standby, charts with unreadable codes, and in the corner, a recliner fitted with restraints, the kind used in psych facilities. Ruth Ann stepped back instinctively. The air felt too tight, too heavy. Her eyes darted around, searching for something human in the space. Then she saw the tray. It held needles. Multiple sizes. Gauze pads stained pink. Labels with timestamps. One read, 0400, retinal fluids. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a rolling stool. This wasn't for a baby. This wasn't for anyone's baby.
Then she heard it.
The softest sound, a footstep behind her. She spun around. Janice stood at the door, face calm, arms crossed. You weren't supposed to see this. Her voice was flat. Not angry, just matter of fact. Ruth Ann straightened herself. What is this room? Janice didn't answer. She stepped inside, gently closed the door behind her. This is above your clearance. Clearance? He's a baby. Janice walked over to the tray, inspecting it as if checking inventory. You don't understand, she said. That child isn't just anyone. He's a legacy. There are expectations. Ruth Ann's voice cracked. You're experimenting on him. Janice turned slowly. Her expression didn't change. We're saving him. From what? Janice looked her dead in the eyes. From his bloodline. The words hit like a slap. Janice stepped closer. You have no idea what families like this are capable of. What they're willing to do to protect a name. The truth isn't just inconvenient. It's a liability. And what about his eyes? Ruth Ann demanded. What did you do to them? Janice stared at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. Nothing permanent yet. Ruth Ann's fists clenched at her sides. What about me? She whispered. What happens to me now that I've seen this? Janice leaned in. If you speak, you'll be discredited. They'll say you broke in, stole medication, attacked a child, and trust me, they have footage. Ruth Ann's stomach turned. You'd destroy me. Janice said nothing. She just walked past, adjusted the tray, and flicked off the light in the medical room. Before closing the door, she added softly, almost kindly, but if you stay quiet, you'll be safe, you'll get paid, and you'll never have to work another day in your life. That night, Ruth Ann lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, watching the blades spin like the hands of a clock she could no longer trust. She thought of the baby's eyes, bright and curious. She thought of the tray of needles, and she thought of a word she hadn't heard in a decade. Legacy. What she finds in the closet isn't baby clothes. It's medical equipment meant for adults. The morning after Ruth Ann's discovery in the nursery closet, the mansion seemed to breathe differently. Slower, heavier, as if its glass bones knew something had been exposed. The air carried a quiet warning. She moved through the halls with the cautious rhythm of someone walking over buried landmines. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. Nurse Janice was gone that morning, replaced by a cheerful younger nurse named Kendra, a black woman with tired eyes and too bright lipstick, as though she were trying to color her way out of exhaustion. Kendra greeted Ruth Ann kindly, but there was hesitation in her smile, like she'd been told not to get too comfortable. Mrs. Whitmore isn't feeling well, Kendra said softly, while folding a blanket at the foot of the crib. She won't be up for visitors today. Ruth Ann nodded but didn't respond. She couldn't shake the memory of Janice's calm threat. If you speak, you'll be discredited. The echo of those words lived under her skin now. Still, silence wasn't safety. It was suffocation. At noon, Ruth Ann was summoned to the main dining room for the first time. She entered cautiously, the marble echoing beneath her soles. Mrs. Glenda Whitmore sat alone at the far end of the table, framed by sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She was dressed impeccably in cream silk, a gold pendant resting against her throat. The baby was nowhere in sight. On the table in front of her was a half-finished cup of tea and a folded newspaper, the Atlanta Journal. The headline read, Whitmore Foundation expands healthcare grants for underprivileged mothers. Ruth Ann recognized the photograph. Glenda smiling, surrounded by reporters, holding a check the size of a small car. Glenda glanced up, her gaze cold and detached. You're Ruth Ann, correct? Yes, ma'am. I'm told you've been doing excellent work. Quiet work. The words hung there, both compliment and threat. Glenda stirred her tea once, then set the spoon down deliberately. I value discretion, especially around my son. You understand? Ruth Ann nodded again. Of course, ma'am. Glenda leaned back. You're a mother, aren't you? The question hit like a tremor. I was, Ruth Ann said quietly. Glenda's lips curved into something that wasn't quite sympathy. Then you understand that sometimes, distance is mercy. Her tone softened, but the chill beneath it remained. Blindness, Glenda continued, eyes drifting toward the window, isn't a curse, it's protection. The world is cruel. He won't have to see what it becomes. Ruth Ann swallowed. You never hold him. Glenda turned back, sharply. Excuse me? Ruth Ann froze, realizing too late she'd spoken aloud. I just meant, babies need contact. Touch. For the first time, emotion flickered in Glenda's face. Not warmth, but something jagged. You think I don't know what my son needs? Her voice dropped to a whisper. He's my blood, my legacy, but he's not mine to comfort. She rose from the table, gathering her composure. That will be all, Miss Thomas. The dismissal was soft, final. So Ruth Ann left the room, pulse drumming in her ears. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about Glenda's words. He's not mine to comfort. What did that mean? The baby's blindness, the secret lab in the nursery, the whispers about stage 2. Everything pointed to something larger, something orchestrated. When the house fell silent, Ruth Ann slipped into the staff library, a narrow room lined with unused shelves and outdated computers. She'd cleaned it dozens of times but never lingered. Now it became her hiding place. She powered on the dusty desktop and searched the archives. It was risky. The system was monitored, but she had to know who Glenda Whitmore was before she became Mrs. Whitmore. The first search result was a video interview from 8 years ago. The title read, Glenda Harrow on Parental Choice and Health Freedom. Ruth Ann clicked play. On screen, Glenda sat in a talk show chair, her hair the same golden shade but her expression livelier, more self-assured. We're not anti-science, she said, smiling at the interviewer. We just believe parents should decide what enters their children's bodies, especially when government programs target communities without transparency. Ruth Ann frowned. The clip cut to another segment, Glenda standing at a podium in front of a banner that read the Clear Future Initiative. Behind her, slides displayed statistics about genetic purity and hereditary immunity. Glenda's voice grew firmer. We can't pretend all genetics are equal in resilience. Some populations carry more risk. We owe it to future generations to acknowledge that. A ripple of applause followed. Ruth Ann's hands went cold. It wasn't just an anti-vaccine campaign. It was propaganda, dressed up as maternal concern. She dug deeper. A link led to a defunct website archived through a database. The Clear Future Initiative had been funded by several donors, including the Whitmore Foundation. And beneath one of the press releases was an old partnership name, the Hensley Genetic Research Facility, Birmingham branch. Ruth Ann clicked again. The Hensley lab had been shut down after a federal investigation. Accusations of unethical testing, data tampering. The details were hazy, redacted, but one headline stood out. Hensley research founder, arrested amid allegations of infant experimentation. Her throat tightened. She scrolled further, past the legal jargon, until one sentence stopped her completely. Among the subjects were infants from minority mothers recruited through public health assistance programs. Minority mothers. Her fingers trembled over the keyboard. She clicked open the funding record attached to the report. The document was grainy, scanned from an old grant sheet. And there it was. Bold, unmistakable. Principal benefactor. The Whitmore Foundation. Authorized signature. Charles Whitmore. A sick weight settled in her chest. It wasn't just coincidence. It wasn't just cruelty. It was pattern. The same man who signed those checks now had a blind son hidden behind a locked nursery. The same woman who'd preached genetic purity was now too afraid to hold her own child. The pieces fit too well. Too painfully. Working late, Miss Thomas. The voice jolted her. She turned to find Griffin, the estate manager, standing in the doorway. His posture was polite, but his eyes were sharp. I couldn't sleep, she said quickly. Thought I'd tidy up in here. Griffin stepped closer. You're not authorized to use this terminal. Didn't realize it mattered. It does, he smiled thinly. Mrs. Whitmore values boundaries. He reached past her and powered down the computer. Then, softly. Curiosity is dangerous in this house. You've been warned once. Don't make them warn you again. He left as silently as he'd appeared. Ruth Ann sat in the dark, the hum of the cooling screen fading like the last trace of courage. The next morning, Glenda hosted a small charity brunch. Cameras, donors, reporters. Ruth Ann wasn't allowed in the main room, but could see everything through the glass hallway that lined the dining area. Glenda was radiant on stage, her words smooth and practiced. "Every child deserves love," she said, smiling for the cameras. "And every mother deserves faith in God's plan." The crowd applauded. Then, in a perfectly rehearsed gesture, a journalist asked about the baby. "Will we get to meet your son, Mrs. Whitmore?" Glenda hesitated, her knuckles tightening around the microphone. "He's resting," she said finally. "My son's blindness is God's will. A reminder that perfection is never ours to claim." Her voice cracked slightly, enough to sound human, but not enough to reveal the truth. The cameras flashed. The story was sealed. After the event, Ruthann saw Glenda in the hallway, head bowed, breathing fast. For a moment, Ruthann almost pitied her, until she noticed the smudge on Glenda's wrist, a faint yellow stain, the kind left by latex gloves. Glenda hadn't been near the baby since last week. So why the gloves? Later that evening, Ruthann returned to the nursery under the guise of cleaning. She ran her hand along the crib's edge, mind spinning with the pieces she'd gathered. The grant, the lab, the experiments. Her eyes fell on the baby's wrist. A faint adhesive mark circled it, the kind left by medical tape. She lifted his tiny arm gently. The mark was fresh. Her stomach turned cold. The nursery door opened behind her. Glenda stood there, hair pulled back, eyes glassy. "You shouldn't be here," she said. I said you shouldn't be here." Her voice wavered, but her hand tightened on the doorframe. "You think I don't know what my husband's done?" she whispered. "What we both did." Ruthann stared, unsure whether to speak. Glenda stepped closer, her perfume sharp in the air. "I tried to stop it once," she said, "years ago. But you can't stop men like Charles. You can only hope to survive them." Then she leaned in, voice trembling. "He'll do the same to anyone who threatens his image. Even you." She backed away, eyes unfocused, and left without another word. Ruthann stood frozen beside the crib, heart racing. Her gaze drifted back to the baby, to the faint mark, to the pale light touching his face. Then, as lightning flashed outside, she saw something new. A small folder half hidden beneath the changing table. She pulled it out. Inside were printed memos, lab headers, test codes. The top page read, "Subject WHMN04, Progress Report, Vision Response Delayed." And stamped in the corner, under funding authorization, Charles Whitmore. The lab's founder was arrested for experiments involving black infants, and the name on the grant, Charles Whitmore. The storm that had rolled through Atlanta finally broke into sunshine, but the Whitmore estate stayed dim. The curtains stayed drawn, the air stayed stale, and the silence inside those glass walls began to feel less like peace and more like containment. Ruthann carried the memory of the file she'd found, the one stamped with Charles Whitmore's signature, like a stone in her chest. Every time she passed his portrait in the foyer, that confident smile seemed to follow her, reminding her who held power here. She tried to work as if nothing had changed, but something in her movements had. Her hands shook when she washed bottles. Her breath caught whenever Glenda entered a room. And the baby had stopped smiling. It was subtle at first, just quieter coos, a longer hesitation before responding. But then, after another visit from the nurse, he barely moved at all. His once alert eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. Something had been done. Again. And Ruthann couldn't unsee it. The next morning, she was sent to pick up new cleaning supplies from a local grocery store in the small town nearby. It was the first time she'd left the estate in nearly 3 weeks. The sunlight felt foreign on her skin. The chatter of strangers felt almost deafening. She pushed her cart through the aisles, her mind running through 1,000 possibilities of what to do next. She could tell someone, but who would believe her? Alive and Maid accusing billionaires of medical abuse. "Excuse me," came a soft voice from behind. Ruthann turned and froze. It was an older black woman, mid-60s, small but sturdy, with a face that carried both kindness and exhaustion. She wore a faded uniform shirt from a cleaning service and held a basket of baby formula. "I know you," the woman said quietly. "You work up at the Whitmore house." Ruthann's pulse quickened. "I do. And you?" The woman nodded. "Used to. Name's Mabel. I was the nanny before they brought you in." Ruthann blinked. She had heard whispers about a nanny who'd been fired suddenly but had never seen her name in the records. Mabel looked around the aisle before leaning closer. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. "Listen to me, sweetheart. Whatever you think you're helping in that house, stop. Keep your head down. Keep your mouth shut, and pray you make it out with your mind intact. Ruth Ann frowned. What happened, Mabel? Why'd they let you go? Mabel's eyes glistened. Because I asked too many questions about that baby. About what they were putting in him. The hum of the refrigerator units filled the space between them. I saw things, Mabel continued. Things that didn't belong in a nursery. The nurse said it was all therapy. But I know what therapy looks like. That child didn't need healing. He needed protection. Ruth Ann swallowed. They said you stole from them. Mabel laughed. A hollow, broken sound. That's what they always say when we stop being useful. Ain't it? She stole something. Easier to believe that than admit we saw too much. Her voice dropped lower still. If that baby ever sees, this whole house goes blind. Ruth Ann's breath caught. What do you mean? Mabel just shook her head. You'll find out soon enough. They hide truth like jewelry in that place. But don't dig too deep, unless you're ready to lose everything. She turned her cart to leave. Mabel. Wait, Ruth Ann called softly. Please. Did you ever find proof? The older woman hesitated, then reached into her apron pocket. She pulled out a small slip of folded paper and pressed it into Ruth Ann's hand. I left something behind, she whispered. Didn't have the courage to use it. Maybe you will. And then she was gone, slipping out of the store and into the afternoon light. Back at the estate, Ruth Ann locked herself in her small staff quarters and unfolded the note. A single line, written in careful cursive, read, Laundry room, baseboard panel, left of the dryer. Her hands trembled. That evening, after everyone had retired and the lights in the main hall dimmed, Ruth Ann made her way to the laundry room. She waited for the hum of the security system to fade. Griffin always powered down part of the feed for maintenance, between midnight and 1. It was her only window. She crouched beside the dryer and pried at the edge of the baseboard. It resisted at first, then gave way with a soft crack. Inside was a small black USB drive wrapped in plastic. Mabel hadn't been lying. Ruth Ann slipped it into her pocket and replaced the panel carefully. She didn't dare use any of the house computers. They were monitored. Instead, she waited until her next town errand day. 2 mornings later, she told Griffin she needed to pick up stain remover from the local store. Instead, she walked into a quiet public library on the edge of town. The librarian barely looked up as Ruth Ann sat down at one of the computers. Her palms were slick with sweat as she plugged in the drive. The desktop flickered. Then a single folder appeared. Watch. Inside were 4 video files labeled by date, all recorded from different angles inside the nursery. Ruth Ann clicked the first one. The grainy footage showed Mrs. Whitmore standing by the crib. She looked nervous, glancing repeatedly toward the door. The baby squirmed in the crib, fussing softly. Glenda pulled a small glass vial from her robe pocket and unscrewed the cap. Ruth Ann's heart began to race. Glenda picked up a bottle of prescribed eye drops from the counter. Ruth Ann recognized it instantly. She'd washed that same bottle dozens of times. Glenda carefully unscrewed the cap, then poured a few drops from the vial into the medicine. She swirled the mixture gently, then placed the bottle back in its exact spot. The timestamp showed 2. The nurse wasn't in the room. Ruth Ann's stomach turned. She opened the next file. This one was from 2 nights later. The same action, Glenda entering alone, adding something to the eye drops, then leaving silently. Ruth Ann clicked the third. The camera angle was slightly different, capturing more of the crib. As Glenda leaned over the baby, she whispered something the microphone barely picked up. Ruth Ann turned up the volume, heart thudding. Forgive me, my darling, Glenda said softly. You'll never see the ugliness he built. She brushed her fingers against the baby's cheek, trembling, and walked out. The 4th video was shorter, only 15 seconds long. It showed Charles entering afterward, picking up the same bottle, holding it to the light. He said something under his breath, too quiet to make out, then placed it back down and left. Ruth Ann sat frozen, tears of rage and disbelief rising in her throat. They were doing this on purpose. They were keeping the child blind. She copied the files to the computer's desktop and tried to email them to herself. But the system blocked attachments. The library's firewall wouldn't allow uploads from unknown drives. Panic clawed at her chest. If she took the USB back to the house and they found it on her, no, she couldn't risk it. She printed one still image from the video, a grainy frame of Glenda holding the vial, and hid the USB in her jacket pocket. As she stepped outside, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Miss Thomas. The voice was Griffin's. Calm, polite, sharp. Did you find what you were looking for? Her mouth went dry. I just picked up the supplies. Interesting, he said softly. Because the security team noticed you took a detour, and the Whitmores value loyalty. He paused. Come home, Miss Thomas. We should talk. The line went dead. Ruth Ann drove back in silence. Her fingers locked around the steering wheel. The trees blurred by. Every turn of the road felt like a countdown. When she arrived, the mansion lights were dim, except for one, Glenda's office. Through the tall window, Ruth Ann could see her silhouette standing perfectly still, waiting. The USB in her pocket felt heavier by the second. She walked to her quarters, closed the door, and leaned against it, trying to breathe. The printer image she'd taken was still in her hand. The faint ink lines showed Glenda's trembling fingers, and the glint of the vial in the nightlight's reflection. She turned it over, whispering to herself. If that baby ever sees, her voice faltered. This whole house goes blind. And for the first time she understood what Mabel meant. Because if the truth came out, the Whitmores wouldn't just lose their reputation. They'd lose everything. The empire built on clean images and dirty secrets would crumble. Ruth Ann looked toward the nursery door at the end of the hall. She had proof now. But proof could kill her just as quickly as silence could. Still, she couldn't stop herself from whispering into the dark. I'm not done. The drive contained surveillance footage of Mrs. Whitmore pouring something into the baby's eye drops. The house no longer felt like a place to work. It felt like a chessboard. Every move Ruth Ann made measured, observed, weighed. The air was colder, the walls thinner. Conversation stopped when she entered rooms. Eyes lingered longer than necessary. She kept her back straight, her voice low, her hands busy, a perfect maid, as far as the surface showed. But beneath that surface, she moved with intention. The footage on the USB had ignited something inside her that no fear could extinguish. Mrs. Whitmore had tampered with the baby's eye drops, and now Ruth Ann had proof. But proof meant nothing if it couldn't be shared, or worse, if it was destroyed before it ever reached the outside world. So Ruth Ann started a second kind of work, quiet, dangerous work. She started testing the baby herself. It began with a flashlight. Late at night, during her scheduled cleaning shift in the nursery, she waited until the house was silent. The baby lay in the crib, eyes half open, his tiny hands curled near his mouth. Ruth Ann switched off the overhead light and pulled a small pen light from her apron pocket. It was one she used for inspecting dust in corners, never meant for anything more. She clicked it on, just briefly, and swept it slowly across the baby's face. He blinked. She turned it off, waited, clicked it again, this time moving the beam to the far left, then the far right. The baby's head turned with the light. It was not a random twitch, not a reflex of sound. He was tracking it. Ruth Ann's heart thudded. She kept the beam on for a second longer than necessary, then switched it off and whispered, "You see, don't you? You always could." The baby smiled. It was a soft, sleepy grin, but it felt like the first real truth in the entire house. She leaned forward, kissed his forehead gently, and tucked the flashlight away. Over the next week, Ruth Ann became bolder. She brought in colored toys, ones from the attic that had been collecting dust. A red rattle, a plush giraffe in neon yellow. She moved them slowly in front of the baby's face, watching his pupils react to contrast and movement. She logged everything in a notebook she kept hidden in the hollowed-out base of a bathroom cabinet. Each entry had a time-stamped description and reaction level. Monday, 2. Shined blue light for 2.3 seconds. Full head turn. Blink. Shadow play responded with hand grasp. Smiled at orange monkey toy. No delay. She recorded his reactions on her phone, using the camera's silent mode. She didn't save the footage to the device itself, too risky. She uploaded it each night to an encrypted folder under a fake email she'd created in the library weeks before. But every tap on her shoulder, every sudden knock, made her flinch. She was running out of places to hide. One night she decided to push the test further. She waited until the rest of the staff was downstairs watching television, a rare moment of collective distraction. She dimmed the nursery lights and stood near the window, where the moonlight poured in through a thin slice between the curtains. She held her hand out slowly, fingers splayed. The baby watched. Then she slowly curled her fingers into a fist. Open, close, open, close. The baby giggled, mimicking the motion with his tiny hand. Ruth Ann felt tears prick her eyes. "You see me?" she whispered. The baby reached upward, toward the light, toward her. She captured the moment on video. One of the clearest yet. He wasn't just reacting. He was engaging, aware, alive in ways he'd never been allowed to show in front of anyone else. She uploaded the footage that same night and tucked the phone deep into a hidden seam inside her mattress. It wasn't the safest place, but it was all she had. Then she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was running toward justice or into a trap. 3 nights later, she got her answer. She returned to her room after breakfast, her first real moment alone all day, and noticed immediately that something was off. Her pillows were crooked, her bathroom door was slightly ajar. The closet light was on. She never left it on. Ruth Ann dropped her laundry basket and ran to the mattress. She pulled it back. The phone was gone. She checked under the frame. The seam had been ripped open, not cleanly, but hurriedly, as if someone had been desperate. She stood frozen, eyes scanning the room. Then she noticed her cabinet drawers, not wide open, not slammed shut, but just slightly misaligned, like someone had rifled through them and tried to cover their tracks. Her hands shook as she lifted the false bottom of the cabinet. The notebook was still there, but the pages had been flipped. She collapsed onto the edge of the bed, heart pounding in her ears. Someone had been inside, and they knew. Later that afternoon, Griffin passed her in the hallway. He didn't stop, didn't speak, but he gave her a look, not angry, worse, amused, like a man who knew something you didn't. Ruth Ann felt the edges of her world closing in. That evening, at the staff dinner, everyone was unusually quiet. Conversations were forced. The laughter was thin. One of the newer maids, a young girl named Yvette, leaned toward Ruth Ann and whispered, "Did you hear? Somebody's being let go tomorrow." Ruth Ann tried to keep her face calm. "Who?" Yvette shrugged. "Dunno. But Griffin's been making calls." Ruth Ann returned to the nursery with a sick knot in her stomach. The baby was asleep. Peaceful, too peaceful. She approached the crib and gently lifted one eyelid. His pupils were dilated, more than usual. She ran a hand across his forehead. Clammy. Not warm but not cold. She checked the eye drops on the counter. A fresh bottle. Unlabeled. Not the one the doctor had prescribed. Her blood turned to ice. Someone was accelerating the damage. Someone was racing her. She sat in the rocking chair beside the crib, eyes on the baby's still face, mind spinning through what to do next. She couldn't run. Not yet. She couldn't stay silent either. She needed backup. A witness. Someone who wouldn't be swayed by money, power, or threats. And suddenly, she knew who. One night she finds her phone missing, and her room tossed like someone was looking for evidence. The next morning, Ruth Ann walked through the Whitmore estate like a ghost inside her own body. The nursery was clean. The dishes were spotless. The silver glinted like it had something to hide. But her mind was elsewhere, buried under layers of history, cement, and questions that refused to stay silent. She couldn't stop thinking about the eye drops, the baby's reactions, the missing phone. Someone had broken into her space, and they weren't just looking for secrets. They were looking to erase them. But the baby wasn't just a pawn. He was evidence, a living contradiction to everything the Whitmores wanted to project. Blind, perfect, controlled. And now that Ruth Ann had begun to unearth his truth, she knew she had to dig deeper into Charles Whitmore's past. Because people like him didn't become billionaires clean. Not when so many others had to disappear to make room for their image. She started with the name that had come up again and again, the Hensley Genetic Research Facility. Every time she dug deeper into its archived mentions, one detail surfaced repeatedly. The lab had once been built inside an old maternity ward, formerly part of Eastbridge Memorial Hospital. A ward that served exclusively black mothers before it was quietly shut down in the 90s. Ruth Ann knew that hospital. Her cousin had given birth there before it was torn down. But it wasn't just a medical building anymore. It was now a luxury condo complex. Whitmore Residences, at Eastbridge. The first development Charles Whitmore ever completed. She took a bus across the city, her stomach tight, her hands clenched in her coat pockets. The ride cut through the new Atlanta skyline, polished and slick, until it gave way to something older, less curated, more cracked at the edges. When she arrived at the building, she almost didn't recognize it. The exterior was all glass panels and steel art sculptures now. The entrance had a water feature. Inside, a doorman in a sleek black suit gave her a quick once-over. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for a resident. Dr. Howard Ellison, retired OB/GYN. The man checked a list, then frowned. "Unit 4B. He doesn't get many visitors. Ruthann nodded. He's expecting me. It wasn't true, but it worked. Dr. Howard Ellison opened the door slowly, a cane in one hand, and a skeptical look in his eyes. He was in his late 70s, tall and black, the kind of man who'd seen enough to stop pretending the world was fair. I know you? He asked, voice rough. No, Ruthann said, but I think you might know a part of me. She introduced herself briefly, mentioned Eastbridge, the Whitmores, the Hensley Lab. His eyes sharpened. I haven't heard that name in years, he said. Come in. His condo was quiet, filled with old books and framed diplomas. A few photos of family lined the mantel, and in the corner sat an old filing cabinet that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. I was a junior attending at Eastbridge back when it was still ours, Dr. Ellison said, settling into an armchair. We delivered most of the neighborhood's children, black babies, poor families, but we had dignity. He paused, sighing, until the city started redeveloping. That's when Charles Whitmore showed up. Young, charming, ruthless. Said he wanted to save the building, turn it into something better. Ruthann leaned forward. But what happened there before it was bought out? That wasn't public, was it? Dr. Ellison gave a dry chuckle. Nothing's public when it involves black mothers and billionaire futures. He looked away, then continued. There was one case, quiet, 1986. I wasn't supposed to be on call that night, but I was filling in for a colleague. A mother came in early labor, complications, no ID, scared to death, light-skinned black woman, said her boyfriend was white, wealthy, family didn't approve. He rubbed his temple. She gave birth to a healthy baby girl. But then, things got strange. The next morning, she was moved rooms. No chart transfers, no birth certificate filed. And when I checked back the next week, there was no record of the baby. No record of her at all. Ruthann's breath caught. Do you remember her name? Dr. Ellison shook his head. Never gave one. But I remember her eyes brown, warm, but exhausted. Like she already knew no one would believe her. He stood slowly, limped to the filing cabinet, and pulled out a manila folder, labeled Eastbridge Archive. From it, he retrieved a yellowing yearbook. Eastbridge Memorial Hospital, 1986. Staff photos, birth announcements, community snapshot. He flipped through until he stopped at a faded page of candid photographs from the maternity ward. Here, he said, pointing to a black and white photo near the bottom corner. This was taken a few days after that night. Someone snapped it during rounds. That's me on the left. Ruthann leaned in. The photo showed a young Dr. Ellison standing beside a nurse, and in the background, barely in frame, was a woman holding a baby wrapped in a striped blanket, the kind hospitals gave out for free. The woman was half-turned, but her face was clear. Ruthann's knees buckled. It was her, or someone who looked exactly like her. Same jawline, same cheekbones, same shape of her eyes. It was as if time had folded in on itself. That's not possible, she whispered. Dr. Ellison looked at her. You sure about that? She stared at the image for what felt like minutes. Her fingers trembled over the edge of the page. Every part of her told her this was no coincidence. She thought back to the labor room she was placed in 10 years ago. How no one allowed her to see her stillborn child. No photos, no footprints, just forms to sign. What if... Her voice cracked. Could that baby have been taken? Dr. Ellison didn't answer. But he didn't deny it either. Then came the unexpected twist. He pulled another folder from the back of the drawer, one he clearly hadn't opened in years. He handed it to her. This is from an internal audit the year before we closed. A few of us started noticing irregularities in birth record transfers. Infants transferred without parent approval, mostly to private programs. We were told it was state-approved research. But when we pressed, they pulled funding. Inside were copies of charts with redacted names, and one unredacted form. Transfer authorization. Infant female. Birth mother. Unknown. Recipient. Hensley Genetic Research Facility. Funding approved by Charles Whitmore. Signature attached. Ruthann felt the ground shift beneath her. Everything clicked. The baby in the mansion, the experiments, the eye drops, the missing records, her own baby. Was it possible? Had the child declared stillborn been taken? Could the Whitmore baby actually be hers? Dr. Ellison leaned back, staring at her with something between pity and understanding. You ever wonder why they brought you into that house? He said quietly. Why a billionaire family with access to private agencies would hire a hospital janitor to be their maid. Ruth Ann felt her throat tighten. They said I came recommended. He nodded. You did. By history. He stood. Cane tapping the floor. Sometimes the past doesn't just haunt the present. It designs it. Ruth Ann left the condo holding copies of the documents, the yearbook photo tucked between them. The city around her looked the same. Cars, buildings, people moving on like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. If that woman in the photo was her, and if the baby was never stillborn but stolen, then the boy upstairs in the Whitmore nursery wasn't just a victim. He was her son. The doctor points to an old yearbook photo. The woman holding the black newborn looks exactly like Ruth Ann. The bus ride back to the estate felt like a descent into someone else's nightmare. The yearbook photo pressed against Ruth Ann's chest inside her coat pocket, but it burned like truth. Every time she blinked, she saw that faded black and white image again. Her face, or someone who could have been her twin, holding a newborn with soft curls and dark skin. The sound of the wheels against the road throbbed in rhythm with her pulse. By the time she stepped through the Whitmore gates again, the air felt different, thicker, expectant, as if the house itself could sense what she now knew. She had spent years scrubbing floors that hid bloodlines, mopping over footprints that history had erased, but this time she wasn't going to clean it away. She was going to prove it. That night she didn't sleep. She sat at the edge of her narrow bed, staring at the phone charger that no longer had a phone attached, and decided what she had to do. She needed her own hospital records. The night her daughter died, the night her life stopped moving forward, and began quietly circling the same pain. She remembered the date as if it had been carved into her skin. April 6th. The hospital had been Westbridge Memorial, the same one where the Whitmore baby was born. The realization made her stomach twist. It was too connected. Too clean. The next morning, she asked Griffin for permission to run a small errand. She said she needed to send money to her niece. He didn't ask many questions, but he watched her too long before nodding. You've been taking a lot of personal days, he said finally. I don't take time, sir. I just work different hours. He smiled thinly. Be careful with those hours. They tend to disappear. She left before he could say more. The records department at Westbridge was tucked into the basement of the administrative building, a concrete maze that smelled like dust and hand sanitizer. The clerk at the counter, a young black woman with box braids, barely looked up when Ruth Ann approached. Patient records request? Yes, ma'am, Ruth Ann said quietly. I gave birth here in 2015. My name's Ruth Ann Thomas. I never got copies. The clerk typed for a moment, then frowned. Do you have an ID? Ruth Ann handed it over. The woman scanned it, her brow furrowing deeper. That's strange, she murmured. There's a file, but it's sealed, and you're not listed as an authorized recipient. How can that be? It's my file. Usually only happens when it's tied to a legal matter. The clerk hesitated. There's a notation here. Restricted per foundation oversight. Ruth Ann's pulse jumped. What foundation? The clerk hesitated. Whitmore. It felt like the floor tilted beneath her. She forced a smile. Could I at least get a confirmation of delivery? Birth certificate, death certificate, something? The woman bit her lip, then lowered her voice. If I print anything, it'll flag my account, but if you happen to look at the screen while I stepped away. Ruth Ann met her eyes. Thankful. Desperate. The clerk rose. I'll go grab toner. The moment she disappeared, Ruth Ann leaned across the counter and read the screen. Her own name, her date of birth, hospital admission details, delivery outcome, stillbirth, cause perinatal asphyxia. But the doctor's signature line made her stomach freeze. Attending physician Dr. Allen K. She knew that name. She'd heard it whispered in the delivery room when the Whitmore baby was born. The same man. She scrolled down. A second notation blinked beneath the form. Sample destroyed by order of Foundation compliance. Her child's blood. Gone. She took a picture of the screen with her new disposable flip phone. Cheap. Untraceable. The image came out blurry. But it was enough. When the clerk returned, Ruth Ann whispered, "Thank you." The young woman nodded quickly, pretending nothing had happened. As Ruth Ann left, a line from an old hymn floated into her head. One her grandmother used to hum when she scrubbed church pews. What's done in the dark will come to the light. That night, Ruth Ann stood in the staff laundry room, her back pressed to the humming machines, trying to breathe. It wasn't just about the Whitmores anymore. It was about every woman like her who'd been told to stay quiet, to trust systems designed to disappear them. She needed proof that couldn't be denied. Proof that lived in the blood. And the baby upstairs, the one they called blind, might hold it. 2 nights later, she got her chance. The nurse had left the nursery early, citing a family emergency. Ruthann was told to handle the child's bedtime routine alone. Her hands shook as she prepared the bottle, slipped a clean cotton swab into her sleeve, and whispered a prayer under her breath. When the baby finished drinking, she gently dabbed at his lips with the swab, just a trace of saliva. Then she placed it in a small zip bag she'd hidden inside her apron. It wasn't much, but it would be enough. The next day, she caught the bus back to the city, under the guise of grocery shopping. Her first stop was a small independent lab on the south side, the kind that did DNA testing for paternity cases and an immigration verification. The woman behind the counter, a middle-aged black tech named Dolores, looked at the swab and the photograph of the Whitmore baby that Ruthann slid across the counter. "You got a court order?" Dolores asked, skeptical. "No, just a question I've waited 10 years to ask." Dolores studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "We do maternal testing, but I need a sample from you too." Ruthann nodded and offered her hand. Dolores pricked her finger gently and collected the drop of blood. "Results take 48 hours, sometimes less if you're lucky." Ruthann slid her an envelope of cash. "Make me lucky." 2 days felt like 2 decades. Every sound in the house startled her. The creak of the stair, the chime of the front door, the faint click of the security system. On the second evening, she found a small envelope slipped under her door. No name, no address, just a plain white fold. Her heart hammered as she tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. DNA comparative analysis. Specimen A, infant. 99.9% maternal match with specimen B. Ruthann Thomas. Her breath caught. Her legs gave out. She sank to the floor, the paper shaking in her hands. The baby upstairs, the Whitmore baby, was hers. For a long time she couldn't move. The noise of the world around her went silent. All she could hear was her own heartbeat, pounding out the years she'd lost. 10 years of grief. 10 years of lies. 10 years of believing her child was dead while he lived above her, called by another name, cradled in a house that tried to erase where he came from. And all the while she'd been cleaning the floors beneath her own son's crib. But before the shock could settle, she heard a knock at her door. "Miss Thomas?" Griffin's voice. Smooth, calm. The Whitmores would like a word. She scrambled to hide the envelope under her mattress, forcing her voice to sound steady. "I'm coming." When she opened the door, Griffin's expression gave nothing away. He motioned for her to follow. Mrs. Whitmore was waiting in the study, pale and brittle, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Charles was there too, standing by the fireplace, his posture sharp as cut glass. "Ruthann," Glenda said softly, "you've been with us a while now." "Yes, ma'am. We appreciate loyalty." Ruthann nodded, her throat dry. Charles stepped forward. "But loyalty means honesty. And it's come to my attention that you've been making inquiries, personal ones, into our hospital, our foundation, even into my wife." Ruthann's breath froze. "I don't know what you mean." He smiled. But there was no warmth in it. "Let's not insult each other." He turned and picked up a folder from the desk. "You see, we have our own sources, our own records." He opened it slowly, revealing a photocopy of her hospital admission form, the same one she'd seen at Westbridge, her signature, the doctor's name, the stillbirth notation. "You see," he said, "we know everything about you, including your unfortunate past." Ruthann's pulse roared in her ears. Glenda looked down, eyes glistening. "You should stop digging, Ruthann. For your sake." And his. For a moment, Ruthann thought of dropping to her knees, begging for truth, but something inside her steadied instead. "I'm not the one who should be afraid," she said quietly. Charles's jaw tightened. "Careful." Ruthann met his stare, unflinching. "You can bury records, you can destroy samples, but you can't erase blood." She turned to leave, heart slamming in her chest, the envelope hidden in her mattress now feeling like a live wire connecting her to everything she'd lost, and everything she could still save. That night, the house felt like it was watching her. Every creak sounded like footsteps, every flicker of light like an accusation. But when she stepped into the nursery and saw her son sleeping, she felt a strange calm settle over her. She reached down, brushed her fingers against his tiny hand, and whispered, "I found you." The baby stirred, his lips curling into the faintest smile. It was as if somehow he knew. A blood sample taken from the Whitmore baby shows a 99.9% maternal match with Ruth Ann. The storm inside Ruth Ann didn't calm with proof. It sharpened. Knowing the child upstairs was hers hadn't brought peace. It had ripped open a wound that had been sealed with lies for 10 long years. Now every coo from the baby's mouth was a haunting echo of the daughter she thought she lost. Every blink of his falsely labeled blind eyes brought back the screams she had swallowed when they told her he was stillborn. She had evidence. A DNA match, forged records, a hidden surveillance clip. But none of it explained how it all happened. And the how mattered. Because if she was going to expose the Whitmores, she needed the full blueprint of their deception. She needed the one person who had been there the night her world was stolen. The nurse who delivered her baby. It took 4 days of digging. Ruth Ann called in favors from old hospital staff, pieced together scheduling logs, and finally found a name, Nurse Clarice DuPont. She was no longer listed in any nursing database. No employment records. No license renewals. She had vanished from the professional world, just a few months after Ruth Ann's stillbirth. But a former janitor at Westbridge remembered something. That nurse, the white one with the voice like sugar, she left real fast. I heard she had a daughter who got real sick, needed treatment up north. That's the last we saw of her. The trail led Ruth Ann to a post office box registered in rural Alabama. From there she found a shipping address used twice for medical supplies, once for a wheelchair, once for insulin kits. It was remote. Off-grid. The kind of place people went when they didn't want to be found. Ruth Ann didn't tell anyone where she was going. She took a bus to Montgomery, then a second one through winding roads lined with pine and poverty. She got off at a dusty convenience store and walked the last 3 miles on foot. She finally saw it, a rusted mailbox at the edge of a narrow gravel path. The name was barely legible on the tin, DuPont. The trailer beyond the trees was weather-worn, with an old wind chime clinking in the wind, and a porch swing that creaked without weight. Ruth Ann stepped forward and knocked. Nothing. She knocked again. Clarice DuPont, she called. I need to talk to you. It's about Westbridge. A long pause. Then a voice, older now, cracked and sharp. Who's asking? My name's Ruth Ann Thomas. You were there the night I gave birth. April. The door didn't open, but she heard movement behind it. I have proof the baby wasn't stillborn. That he was taken. The latch clicked. Slowly, the door creaked open. Clarice DuPont looked nothing like Ruth Ann remembered. Her once blonde hair was streaked with gray and pulled into a loose braid. Her eyes, once kind and disarming, were cautious now. Defensive. I told myself this day would come, she said quietly. Come in. The trailer smelled like dust and lavender. Medical bills sat stacked on the table. Old family photos lined the windowsill. One showed a teenage girl in a hospital gown, smiling weakly at the camera. That's my daughter, Clarice said. Lila. She needed surgery. The kind insurance won't touch. She motioned for Ruth Ann to sit. I know why you're here. I saw your name again last year, on a donation list from the Whitmore Foundation. I figured they brought you in for housekeeping, but I knew the real reason. Why? Ruth Ann asked, voice trembling. Clarice looked away. Because guilt doesn't forget faces. Especially ones you stole from. Ruth Ann laid the DNA match printout on the table. This is him. That boy in their mansion is my son. Clarice nodded. Slowly. I knew he was. From the moment they handed him over. She sat down across from Ruth Ann and rubbed her hands together like they still had blood on them. They told me it was a mistake. That a switch needed to happen for a PR reason. That the child had an unusual skin tone. And the parents were donors. Powerful ones. It wasn't the first time they'd done something like that. But it was the first time they asked me. Ruth Ann leaned forward. Why did you say yes? Clarice's voice cracked. Because Charles Whitmore paid for Lila's spinal surgery the next morning. It was a condition. I had 2 hours to decide my daughter's legs, or your child's life. She looked up at Ruth Ann, eyes glossy. I chose wrong. Ruth Ann's jaw tightened, but her heart cracked somewhere behind the rage. They told me my baby died. They wouldn't let me hold her, wouldn't let me see her. I know, Clarice whispered. I signed the falsified chart. I kept the real one in my drawer until the hospital was bought out and the records were transferred to Whitmore's foundation. What happened to my original records?
They were destroyed.
Shredded by the new admin. I watched the bag get picked up by a private security firm, not even hospital staff. And you just let it happen. Clarice stood abruptly, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out a small metal key attached to a faded ribbon. I didn't let everything go, she said. I kept what I could: the birth room tape, the original birth bracelet, even the transfer form. I didn't know what to do with them, so I locked them up in a deposit box back in Birmingham. She placed the key in Ruth Ann's hand. A tiny tag was attached. It read, "Insurance, Whitmore scandal."
"Why now?" Ruth Ann whispered. "Why give this to me now?"
Clarice's voice was tired. "Because my daughter's gone. Cancer got her last fall. I've got nothing left to lose. And you've already lost more than you ever should have." She paused, then added, "They'll try to erase you again. Ruth Ann, you go after them, and they'll throw everything at you. Lawyers, smear campaigns, they'll try to make you out to be some angry black woman trying to claim a billionaire's child." Ruth Ann's jaw tightened. "Let them. I'm not leaving him in that house." Clarice's hand hovered over hers. "Then don't just take the child, take the whole lie down with you." Back at the estate that night, Ruth Ann lay awake, the key pressed into her palm like a lifeline. The walls around her groaned in the wind. And for the first time she felt the house wasn't just hiding secrets, it was built on them. Everything Whitmore owned had been paid for with silence. But the silence had a crack now, and she held the key. She hands Ruth Ann a key to a safety deposit box labeled "Insurance Whitmore Scandal." The storm inside Ruth Ann didn't calm with proof. It sharpened. Knowing the child upstairs was hers hadn't brought peace. It had ripped open a wound that had been sealed with lies for 10 long years. Now every coo from the baby's mouth was a haunting echo of the daughter she thought she lost. Every blink of his falsely labeled blind eyes brought back the screams she had swallowed when they told her he was stillborn. She had evidence. A DNA match, forged records, a hidden surveillance clip. But none of it explained how it all happened. And the how mattered. Because if she was going to expose the Whitmores, she needed the full blueprint of their deception. She needed the one person who had been there the night her world was stolen, the nurse who delivered her baby. It took 4 days of digging. Ruth Ann called in favors from old hospital staff, pieced together scheduling logs, and finally found a name: Nurse Clarice DuPont. She was no longer listed in any nursing database. No employment records. No license renewals. She had vanished from the professional world just a few months after Ruth Ann's stillbirth. But a former janitor at Westbridge remembered something. That nurse? The white one with the voice like sugar. She left real fast. I heard she had a daughter who got real sick. Needed treatment up north. That's the last we saw of her. The trail led Ruth Ann to a post office box registered in rural Alabama. From there she found a shipping address used twice for medical supplies. Once for a wheelchair, once for insulin kits. It was remote, off-grid, the kind of place people went when they didn't want to be found. Ruth Ann didn't tell anyone where she was going. She took a bus to Montgomery, then a second one through winding roads lined with pine and poverty. She got off at a dusty convenience store and walked the last 3 miles on foot. She finally saw it, a rusted mailbox at the edge of a narrow gravel path. The name was barely legible on the tin. DuPont. The trailer beyond the trees was weather-worn, with an old wind chime clinking in the wind, and a porch swing that creaked without weight. Ruth Ann stepped forward and knocked. Nothing. She knocked again. "Clarice DuPont?" she called. "I need to talk to you. It's about Westbridge." A long pause. Then a voice. Older now, cracked and sharp. "Who's asking?" "My name's Ruth Ann Thomas. You were there the night I gave birth. April 7th. The door didn't open, but she heard movement behind it. "I have proof the baby wasn't stillborn, that he was taken." The latch clicked. Slowly, the door creaked open. Clarice DuPont looked nothing like Ruth Ann remembered. Her once blonde hair was streaked with gray and pulled into a loose braid. Her eyes, once kind and disarming, were cautious now. Defensive. "I told myself this day would come," she said quietly. "Come in." The trailer smelled like dust and lavender. Medical bills sat stacked on the table. Old family photos lined the windowsill. One showed a teenage girl in a hospital gown, smiling weakly at the camera. "That's my daughter," Clarice said. "Lila. She needed surgery, the kind insurance won't touch." She motioned for Ruth Ann to sit. "I know why you're here. I saw your name again last year on a donation list from the Whitmore Foundation. I figured they brought you in for housekeeping. But I knew the real reason." "Why?" Ruth Ann asked, voice trembling. Clarice looked away. "Because guilt doesn't forget faces." especially ones you stole from. Ruth Ann laid the DNA match printout on the table. This is him. That boy in their mansion is my son. Clarice nodded, slowly. I knew he was. From the moment they handed him over, she sat down across from Ruth Ann and rubbed her hands together like they still had blood on them. They told me it was a mistake, that a switch needed to happen for a PR reason, that the child had an unusual skin tone, and the parents were donors, powerful ones. It wasn't the first time they'd done something like that, but it was the first time they asked me. Ruth Ann leaned forward. Why did you say yes? Clarice's voice cracked. Because Charles Whitmore paid for Lila's spinal surgery the next morning. It was a condition. I had 2 hours to decide, my daughter's legs or your child's life. She looked up at Ruth Ann, eyes glossy. I chose wrong. Ruth Ann's jaw tightened, but her heart cracked somewhere behind the rage. They told me my baby died. They wouldn't let me hold her, wouldn't let me see her. I know, Clarice whispered. I signed the falsified chart. I kept the real one in my drawer until the hospital was bought out and the records were transferred to Whitmore's foundation. What happened to my original records? They were destroyed. Shredded by the new admin. I watched the bag get picked up by a private security firm, not even hospital staff. And you just let it happen. Clarice stood abruptly, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out a small metal key attached to a faded ribbon. I didn't let everything go, she said. I kept what I could. The birthroom tape, the original birth bracelet, even the transfer form. I didn't know what to do with them, so I locked them up in a deposit box back in Birmingham. She placed the key in Ruth Ann's hand. A tiny tag was attached. It read, Insurance, Whitmore Scandal. Why now? Ruth Ann whispered. Why give this to me now? Clarice's voice was tired. Because my daughter's gone. Cancer got her last fall. I've got nothing left to lose. And you've already lost more than you ever should have. She paused, then added, They'll try to erase you again, Ruth Ann. You go after them, and they'll throw everything at you. Lawyers, smear campaigns. They'll try to make you out to be some angry black woman, trying to claim a billionaire's child. Ruth Ann's jaw tightened. Let them. I'm not leaving him in that house. Clarice's hand hovered over hers. Then don't just take the child. Take the whole lie down with you. Back at the estate that night, Ruth Ann lay awake, the key pressed into her palm like a lifeline. The walls around her groaned in the wind. And for the first time she felt the house wasn't just hiding secrets. It was built on them. Everything Whitmore owned had been paid for with silence. But the silence had a crack now, and she held the key. She hands Ruth Ann a key to a safety deposit box, labeled Insurance Whitmore Scandal. 10. Security cameras don't catch racism. Word count. The night Ruth Ann returned from Alabama, she didn't sleep. She lay on her narrow mattress staring at the ceiling, Clarice DuPont's key clutched in one hand, and her child's stolen life pressing heavy on her chest. The house around her was quiet, but not calm. It was the kind of silence that followed a threat, the kind that crept down hallways and waited outside doors like smoke. She thought about running, about scooping her son into a blanket and vanishing into the night, like some woman in a movie. But real life didn't work that way. Especially not for women like her. Black, alone, powerless by design. No, she would not vanish. She would confront them, with everything. The next evening, just after the staff dinner had cleared, and the Whitmore house sunk into its usual velvet hush, Ruth Ann asked Griffin if she could speak with Charles and Glenda privately. He gave her a look like he knew this day would come. They're not fond of surprises, he said. I'm not here to surprise them, Ruth Ann replied. I'm here to return something that never should have left me. The Whitmores waited in the private sitting room. Charles stood by the fireplace, drink in hand, posture sharp. Glenda sat stiffly on a cream sofa, one ankle tucked behind the other, knuckles white around a porcelain teacup. The flames from the hearth flickered gold against their expressions, but there was no warmth between them. Only calculation. You wanted to speak? Charles asked, sipping slowly. Ruth Ann didn't sit. She reached into her coat and placed a file on the table between them. It wasn't thick, just 3 pages. But it had weight. DNA results, she said softly. That child upstairs is mine. Glenda didn't blink. Charles exhaled once through his nose, as if disappointed, not surprised. I see. Ruth Ann stared at them both. I don't want your money. I don't want your apologies. I want my son, and I want the world to know what you did. Glenda set her cup down, Her voice was almost tender. He's not yours anymore, Ruth Ann. Yes, he is. You don't know what you're walking into. I do, and I'm not walking away. Charles stepped forward, picking up the file and flipping through it slowly. He didn't read the words. He didn't need to. You're very brave, he said, for a woman with no leverage. I have evidence. Documents. A safety deposit box, with the original delivery records. Medical footage. Your wife on tape. Charles didn't flinch. He set the file back on the table, crossed the room to a cabinet, and pulled out a black leather checkbook. He wrote a number so large the ink scratched the paper. He tore it out and held it toward her. Take it. Walk away. I'll have a townhouse put in your name by sunrise. Full custody arrangements, monthly stipend, tax-free, no lawsuits, no headlines, just peace. Ruth Ann didn't move. Everything you think you want, he said smoothly, will only bring chaos. They won't believe you. They never do. Then he looked her straight in the eye. And even if you shout the truth from the rooftops, all we have to do is leak your file. What file? Charles smiled. You think we let anyone live under our roof without knowing everything about them? Your minor trespassing charge in 2009, the one you didn't fight because you couldn't afford a lawyer, it's already been repackaged. Makes you look aggressive. Unstable, Glenda added softly. Unfit. Ruth Ann's chest rose and fell. Her voice broke but stayed clear. You did all that to bury a lie. We did all that, Charles said, to protect a name. Ruth Ann stared at the check, at the gleaming room, the empire built on silence. Then she stepped back. You can bury a lot with money, she whispered, but not blood. And she walked out. She didn't cry, not yet. She returned to her room, locked the door, and placed the check in the trash. She packed what little she had, the original files, the still photo from the video, the DNA results, and slid them into a manila envelope, labeled Truth. She would make copies in the morning, send them to a journalist, take them to court, leave the house with her child, and never look back. But morning never gave her the chance. At 6:42 a.m., a hard knock hit her door. Not the polite tap of a house manager, or the soft call of a coworker. It was official. Mail. She opened it slowly. 2 uniformed officers stood outside, one with his hand on his belt, the other holding a warrant.
Ruth Ann Thomas?
The first said. Yes. You're under investigation for theft of proprietary medical documents and breach of non-disclosure agreements, per complaint by the Whitmore estate. Ruth Ann blinked. What are you talking about? The second officer held up a clipboard. We have a warrant to search the premises and escort you for questioning. Behind them, Griffin stood near the stairwell, watching. His expression was unreadable. They searched her room like they'd done it before. They pulled up the mattress, yanked open drawers, unfolded her uniform. They found the manila envelope. One of them opened it and held up the DNA report. Interesting. Ruth Ann stepped forward. That's my child. The officer raised an eyebrow. We'll let the courts decide that. As they walked her down the long hallway, past the nursery, Ruth Ann turned her head just in time to see her son at the edge of the crib, peeking over the railing. He didn't cry. He just watched, like he'd always been able to do. Ruth Ann refuses and wakes up the next morning to a police warrant at the door. The holding cell was cold, not just in temperature but in atmosphere, the kind of sterile cold that seeped beneath your skin and made you forget what time it was. Ruth Ann sat on the bench, her hands resting in her lap, her mind echoing with the final image of her son's eyes watching her as they led her out of the Whitmore estate. No charges had been formally filed. Not yet. But that didn't matter. The police report was already online. Her mugshot already shared. The story had written itself. Maid arrested for theft, forgery at Whitmore estate. Insider tried to sell billionaire baby's medical records. Disgruntled staffer claims child as hers. Court records show trespassing history. None of them called her Ruth Ann. By the time she was released on conditional bond, everything was gone. Her job, her position, her name. She returned to a motel off the highway, the cheapest one she could find, and collapsed onto the thin mattress. There were no interviews, no one asking for her side, just silence. The kind of erasure the system had perfected. They'd used her past against her like a skeletal. The trespassing incident, from over a decade ago when she'd tried to visit her cousin in a gated community, was now headlined as criminal behavior. One blurry video of her yelling at a hospital administrator. recorded after she was denied answers about her stillborn child, was captioned as aggressive conduct towards staff, manipulated, spun, weaponized. But hundreds of miles away, in a small shared newsroom in D.C., a different story was taking shape. April Kingsley was 28, tired of clickbait, and obsessed with systems that made people disappear. She had covered wrongful evictions, misreported deaths, and school data scandals. But the Whitmore case caught her eye for a different reason, because none of it made sense. The timeline of events released by the Whitmore Foundation didn't line up. The charges against Ruth Ann were vague, almost too vague. The footage released by the estate's PR team showed her rummaging through drawers, but never stealing anything, and the footage cut off just before she supposedly left with the evidence. April had learned a long time ago that power didn't just erase truth, it replaced it. She began digging. The first thing she did was call every employee ever listed as former staff of the Whitmore estate. Most refused to speak. One, a groundskeeper named Alonzo, agreed, but off the record. She never touched the money, he said. They offered her a check, and she threw it in the trash. April blinked. What check? She never took it. Said her child was more valuable than any number. The line went quiet. She wasn't crazy, Alonzo whispered. She was mourning and fighting. April's jaw tightened. She found the name of the hospital where Ruth Ann supposedly gave birth, Westbridge Memorial. She filed a FOIA request for delivery records from April 7. It was denied due to privacy laws. So she went another route. She found a former administrator, a retired data technician named Celine, now living in North Carolina. April drove 10 hours for a 10-minute conversation. Celine didn't want to be quoted, but she remembered the name Ruth Ann Thomas. They made her sign a form the night of her baby's birth, she said. Said it was release paperwork, but it didn't look right. I flagged it. Then what happened? April asked. I was told not to ask. Back in D.C., April filed a second request, this time through legal mediation, for access to Ruth Ann's signature records tied to the hospital's archive. Her lawyer argued precedent, citing cases of falsified medical records under private-public partnerships. After 2 weeks of silence, she received a packet in the mail. Buried inside was a scanned document, labeled, Post-Delivery Acknowledgement Form, signed by Ruth Ann Thomas. Dated April 1:12 p.m. Ruth Ann's baby had allegedly died at 12. The form was signed an hour after her child was declared stillborn. The hospital's version claimed she had signed at the same time she was told of the death. April checked the metadata. The timestamp wasn't forged. It had been buried. Deliberately. She called her editor. I have something, she said. Is it solid? It's more than solid. It's a crack in the floor beneath them. That night, Ruth Ann sat alone in her motel room, her hands wrapped around a cup of weak coffee, watching herself unravel across cable news. Every station painted her as the same trope: desperate maid, unstable woman, bitter employee. Her name had been turned into a cautionary tale. But then her burner phone buzzed. Unknown number. DC area code. Ms. Thomas, came a voice. My name is April Kingsley. I believe you've been lied about, and I believe I can prove it. Ruth Ann didn't respond right away. Her lips parted slightly, her voice nearly cracking. I'm listening, she said. April finds a missing medical form with Ruth Ann's original signature timestamped 1 hour after her alleged stillbirth. The article dropped at 9:01 a.m. on a rainy Thursday. April Kingsley had worked through the night. Every sentence carved with precision, every source double-checked, every document scrubbed of redactions. The headline was bold, defiant, not clickbait, but indictment. Maid or mother. The billionaire baby scandal, the Whitmores tried to bury. It opened with a photo of Ruth Ann. Not her mugshot, but an old staff badge image taken when she first joined the Whitmore estate, before her face had been dragged across national news. The expression in the photo was simple: hopeful, tired, unarmed. Then came the rest: her signed medical forms, the timestamp that exposed the lie, the hidden footage of Glenda Whitmore pouring unknown liquid into the child's eye drops, and most damning of all, the DNA results confirming maternal match. Within the first hour, the article had 1.3 million views. By noon, it was the #1 trending story across all major platforms. By evening, it was global. At the motel, Ruth Ann sat on the edge of her bed in stunned silence. The article had gone live just 40 minutes ago, and already her phone was buzzing non-stop. Numbers she didn't recognize, messages she hadn't asked for, reporters begging for quotes, producers offering airtime. April had warned her this might happen. "You're no longer invisible," she'd said. And Ruthann wasn't sure if that felt like liberation or exposure. On the TV, 3 anchors debated her sanity like a topic for sport. She was a maid, not a mother, one host insisted. "But she has proof," the second countered. "How many times have women of color been dismissed like this? She worked in that house. She could have planted anything." Ruthann turned the volume down. The noise didn't matter. What mattered was that the world finally knew. At the Whitmore estate, the energy had shifted. Protesters stood outside the gates, holding signs with messages like "Let her speak," "We believe Ruthann," and "Motherhood is not a crime." The media vans parked up the hill like vultures waiting for weakness. Charles Whitmore released a statement at noon. "The claims made by Ms. Thomas are deeply hurtful and entirely false. We are cooperating with authorities and reserve the right to pursue legal action for defamation." But the world had already moved past his version of events, because then came the video. It wasn't supposed to leak. The footage came from a medical training archive at Westbridge, a short clip used for educational purposes, stored in a closed-access database. But someone had cracked the firewall. Possibly an inside whistleblower. Possibly divine intervention. The video, just 19 seconds long, showed the Whitmore child, no more than 6 months old, lying in a hospital crib. A nurse stood nearby with a notepad. "Patient remains unresponsive to light stimuli," she says flatly. But as she walks away and the blinds flutter open, the baby turns his head toward the sunlight and smiles. The timestamp in the corner is clear. The date is 3 months after his supposed blindness diagnosis. Within 30 minutes of the video's release, it had 8.7 million views. The baby sees began trending on every platform. In Atlanta, Ruthann's former neighbors held a candlelight vigil. At the grocery store where she'd met Mabel, employees taped her photo to the window beside a sign reading, "Justice for Ruthann. Justice for every silenced mother." People began showing up outside police stations, chanting her name. Activists drew connections to systemic abuse in elite medical facilities, to the history of black mothers being stripped of authority over their own children. That night, Ruthann was released without bail. The charges had not been dropped, but public pressure made them impossible to enforce without backlash. She emerged from the courthouse to a sea of flashing lights. Not police, but cameras. Microphones. Tears. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. April met her on the courthouse steps and gently guided her into a waiting car. "You okay?" she asked. Ruthann stared out the window, eyes full, voice low. "I don't know who I am outside of silence." April placed a hand over hers. "You're a mother, and now the world finally sees that." But even victory had a shadow. The next morning, April woke to a voicemail from an anonymous number. "I don't know who else to call," the voice said. "It's about Nurse Kendra. She was the one who confirmed the baby's blindness in that training clip. She was found dead in her apartment last night. They're calling it suicide." April's blood ran cold. "No note," the voice continued. "Just an open window. The security footage in the hallway? Wiped." April ended the message and dialed Ruthann immediately. "I need to see you," she said. Ruthann, who hadn't slept, answered calmly. "Something's happening, isn't it?" "Yes," April said, "and I think they're getting desperate. The nurse on tape confirming the baby's blindness is found dead in her apartment. Ruled a suicide." The morning the court date was announced, Atlanta didn't breathe. Every radio host, every morning show, every subway conversation buzzed with one name: Ruthann Thomas, and one question: is she the real mother of the Whitmore heir? It was no longer just a story. It was a reckoning. The courtroom date was set for May 14th. A full evidentiary hearing to determine the legal status of the child, the integrity of the adoption claim, and whether Ruthann's rights as a mother had been illegally severed under false medical pretenses. Charles Whitmore was nowhere to be found. A week before the court date, he'd left for Zurich under the guise of business continuity, and had yet to return. No extradition treaty, no interview. Just a trail of cold statements and colder silence. Glenda, on the other hand, remained, or rather stayed present just enough to be visible. She appeared on a curated morning news segment, 2 days before the trial, seated in a perfectly lit room with a bouquet of white lilies behind her. Her voice trembled with practiced grief. "We had no knowledge of the baby's origins. I only did what was told to me by doctors and staff. I was told the child needed care. I gave him love, I have always believed in motherhood, in whatever form it arrives. When asked about the eye drop footage, she shifted in her seat and murmured something about experimental therapies and doctored clips. The anchor didn't push, but Ruthanne's face was different. Raw, unrehearsed. When April asked if she wanted to make a public statement before the court date, Ruthanne declined. They've already seen the headlines, she said. Let them see the truth in the courtroom. But inside, she was scared. Not because the truth wasn't on her side, but because status had a long history of drowning truth in paperwork, privilege, and PR. She was a maid, a former janitor, a black woman with a public defender and a 10-year-old trauma no one ever bothered to verify. And she was going up against America's billionaire elite. The morning of the hearing, protesters stood outside the courthouse in rows so thick the police had to block off entire streets. Signs filled the air like flags in a quiet war. Blood over billionaires. Motherhood isn't a crime. Believe black women. Inside the courtroom, Ruthanne sat alone at the plaintiff's table. No family, no entourage, just her and the files. Documents that had nearly gotten her jailed, murdered, and disappeared. Across from her sat a team of 4 corporate attorneys, dressed in designer suits, their faces slick and unreadable. Beside them, Glenda Whitmore in a charcoal skirt suit and pearls, her lips tight, her gaze down. She didn't look once at Ruthanne. Then the judge entered, Honorable Judge Ava Montrose. Black, mid-50s, hair pressed into a low chignon. No smile, no script. Ruthanne stared at her, really stared, and something flickered in her chest. The woman on the bench wasn't just familiar. She was familiar in spirit. She had that same look Ruthanne remembered from a teacher she had in high school. The kind who expected you to do more than survive. The kind who carried the invisible bruises of being unheard, but never stopped speaking. As Judge Montrose sat, she adjusted her glasses and scanned the room. I'm not here to entertain public pressure, she said. I'm here to determine if this court failed a mother before her child ever learned how to cry. The room went silent. The testimonies began. April was called first. She delivered her findings with poise, laying out the inconsistencies, the tampered timestamps, the erased records. Then came the DNA analyst, confirming the 99.9% maternal match between Ruthanne and the child. Then Clarice DuPont, flown in with full immunity, testified via video. Her voice trembled, but her words hit like a hammer. I was told to switch the birth records. I was told to mark the baby as stillborn. The order came through a representative of the Whitmore Foundation. She paused. And I signed because my daughter needed surgery. I live with that sin every day. Ruthanne bowed her head, not in shame, in memory. Then came Ruthanne's turn. She stood slowly, approached the witness stand with hands that had held that baby before the world ever admitted he existed. She spoke simply. I was told my child died. I believed them, for years. Her voice cracked once. She didn't stop. I cleaned hospital floors while they hid his name. I took care of that boy in their house without knowing he was mine. And when I found out, they tried to bury me. She paused, then looked directly at Glenda. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for revenge. I'm asking to be a mother. 'Cause I am one. Then the defense rose. Glenda's lawyers argued that the situation was unfortunate, but not illegal. That Ruthanne had failed to claim her child within the legal threshold of challenge. That emotional bonds were not legal proof. They played the manipulated footage again, the one of Ruthanne crying in the hospital hallway, edited to look unstable. They leaned into status, language, education. She may be biologically related, one attorney said, but the child knows Glenda as his mother. To rip him from the only home he's known, is that not another form of cruelty? Ruthanne looked down, biting her tongue, until it bled. They were painting her as the intruder. The final moments dragged long into the afternoon. Every whisper in the courtroom felt like a scream. Then Judge Montrose called for a recess. When she returned, her expression had changed. She tapped her gavel lightly, then leaned forward. This court has reviewed all submitted testimony, exhibits, and independent analysis. What we're facing here is not merely a question of biology, but of ethical failure, systemic, sustained, and deliberate. She paused. This court is not prepared to render a private judgment on a matter that has clearly rippled into the public trust. Therefore, I am ordering a full public hearing. All media, national and international, will be granted access. Gasps echoed. The Whitmore lawyers scrambled to whisper objections, but the judge silenced them with one look. This isn't about property. This is about a child, and the public deserves to see what happens when power tries to erase motherhood. She banged her gavel once. Full hearing begins in 72 hours. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted. Ruth Ann didn't cry. She couldn't.
Not yet.
She walked out into the sunlight, past the cameras, past the reporters, past the questions. She had no answers left, only truth, and the will to fight for it. Before the verdict, the judge orders a full public hearing, with national media watching. The days between the judge's ruling and the public hearing were electric, charged with tension, hope, and danger. Ruth Ann hardly slept. She spent each hour reviewing evidence with April, clarifying her statements, rehearsing responses. The world was watching now. There was no going back. Inside the Whitmore Foundation headquarters, something else was happening. Executives held closed-door meetings. Public relations teams flicked their phones like worn ritual. The foundation's stock, once a symbol of quiet influence, slipped day by day. Donors withdrew quietly. Philanthropic partners distanced themselves. The brand that had bought silence was now hemorrhaging reputation. Medical staff at affiliated hospitals resigned in droves. Some wrote anonymous letters citing ethical suppression and institutional coercion. Nurse Kendra's name faded from internal rosters. Guards who once stood posted in maternity wings disappeared from shift lists. The corridors of power were unraveling from within. On the eve of the press hearing, Ruth Ann's attorneys handed her a folder stamped Whitmore medical records, unredacted. It had everything: test logs, MRI scans, retinal fluid samples, hospital opinions, internal emails. Each page peeled back a layer of deception. She turned one page and caught her breath. A medical opinion from a specialist, not affiliated with any Whitmore hospital, recommended that the baby undergo a visual cortex scan. It noted evidence of prior optic nerve abnormality, potentially induced. In layman's terms, someone had tampered with the baby's eyes. She clenched the folder tight. This was going to be her proof, the kind that couldn't be erased. Morning came. The courthouse plaza was packed with protesters, family rights groups, media vans, and cameras that looked like they might never sleep. A stage was set, banners reading "Truth over Power." Hear her voice. Motherhood is not property. Ruth Ann walked out to the stage, in a simple black dress, no jewelry, hair pulled back. She didn't walk. She arrived. The crowd hushed, as though holding its breath. April stood nearby. She caught Ruth Ann's gaze and nodded. The moment she'd been waiting for had arrived. The cameras rolled. The press conference began with the judge's directive. The full hearing would begin in just hours, and the public had a right to witness it. Then the attorneys for Ruth Ann and her legal team were introduced. But when the Whitmore representatives were called, no one emerged. The podium stood empty. A murmur ran through the crowd. Then Ruth Ann's voice came through the mics. She approached the podium slowly, eyes scanning the sea of faces, as if memorizing every doubt, every advocate, every skeptic. She cleared her throat. "My name is Ruth Ann Thomas," she began. Her voice was calm, firm, small, everywhere. "When I came into the Whitmore estate, I was told I would never see beyond walls. I was given silence. I was paid to clean floors. But what needed cleaning was this entire system." Gasps ran through the crowd. She held up the medical records folder. "These are not accusations. These are facts. These are the eyes of a child betrayed by the very people who claim to love him." She paused. The cameras closed in. From foundation board members to hospital doctors to PR operatives, every misdeed is now a matter of record. And today, I claim what was stolen from me: custody of my son, transparency, accountability, justice. She stepped aside. The attorneys presented motions, petitions, previous court orders rescinded. The large courtroom doors opened to media. The crowd surged into the plaza. The Whitmore Foundation's collapse became specter and headline. The stock market reacted swiftly. Shares plummeted as broadcasted scandals circulated hours before. Researchers, boards, trustees severed ties. Press releases claimed reorganization, internal review, executive resignation. But the public saw it differently. On live feeds, hospital staffers were shown walking out of maternity wings, filing resignations, sometimes clutching protest signs. Some left statements: "I refuse to be part of a house of lies." In one broadcast clip, a nurse held a small sign: "I witnessed unethical cover-ups. I stand with Ruth Ann." As reporters swarmed Ruthann after the conference, she fielded questions calmly. Is this enough proof? Will you continue suing? Will the child be safe? Her responses were quiet but sharp. Yes, because the truth must be enough now. I'll fight until every cover-up is exposed. He is safe with me now, and I will protect him. When Glenda Whitmore's name was mentioned, Ruthann's eyes flashed. I do not hate her. I pity the world that taught her to hide behind lies. And the crowd cheered. That evening, April returned to her apartment, exhilarated, exhausted, wired. She booted up her laptop to respond to emails when a new message popped in. Subject: this wasn't the only baby. The sender was anonymous. The body of the email had a single scanned page, a hospital ledger from a once hidden wing of the Hensley lab, listing subject WHM-06, with maternal name redacted, and a note, delayed transfer black mother sample. April's fingers trembled. She sent a message to Ruthann immediately.
This goes deeper than we thought.
There may be more mothers, more children. Ruthann's phone buzzed on her nightstand in her new temporary home. She picked it up, reading the subject line, and her breath caught. Because as victorious as this day was, the war had only just begun. April receives an anonymous email. Subject line: this wasn't the only baby. The email changed everything. What began as a personal reclamation, a single mother's fight to prove she'd been wronged, erupted into a national scandal that forced the country to look long and hard at what had been hidden in plain sight. The subject line haunted April for days. This wasn't the only baby. The hospital ledger attached in the anonymous message revealed case numbers, vague, sterile codes tied to unnamed infants. But a few had legible notations: maternal objection overridden, intervention paid in full, assigned donor identity withheld. With the help of pro bono attorneys, data forensic specialists, and a coalition of investigative journalists, April and her team matched case codes with fragmented hospital files from as far back as 23 babies, 14 hospitals, 8 cities. One pattern. All the birth mothers were black. All had signed suspicious post-delivery forms. And in each case, the attending hospital received donations from the Whitmore Foundation within 6 months of the birth. It wasn't a scandal anymore. It was a blueprint. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services launched a formal investigation. Congress called emergency hearings. Ruthann was summoned to testify before a Senate Oversight Committee. She stood in a navy dress, palms trembling slightly as she raised her right hand. My name is Ruthann Thomas. I was told my baby was dead. Then I was paid to raise him in silence. But my story is not unique. I am not the first. I may not be the last, but I will be the loudest. Her voice shook, not from fear, but from fury barely contained. We've normalized erasing black motherhood. We've made it protocol. And I'm here to say, never again. The chamber was still. The silence afterward wasn't dismissal. It was reverence. Meanwhile, the Whitmore Foundation dissolved under federal audit. A dozen executives resigned or were indicted. Charles Whitmore, still hiding in Switzerland, was subpoenaed by international courts for conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of medical ethics law. Glenda disappeared from public view entirely. Her last public statement, "I only followed what I was told," was torn apart by the same media machine that once protected her. But Ruthann didn't wait for courtrooms to hand down justice. She built her own. She used her settlement, which she almost refused out of principle, to found the Invisible No More Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to helping black women challenge falsified hospital records, access prenatal legal support, and reclaim their birthrights. Her first board meeting included 2 formerly silenced mothers who had come forward after seeing her story. One had already begun fighting for visitation rights to the son she thought was adopted overseas. Another had been institutionalized for refusing to sign a form after her child was declared medically unfit. Ruthann looked at them during that meeting and said, "No one believed me either. But now they can't unsee the truth." The toddler, her son, was no longer just a case study, no longer a pawn in someone else's narrative.
He had a name, Ezekiel.
A room of his own.
A voice.
And one day, that voice changed everything. It happened during a fundraiser for the nonprofit. Ruthann stood on stage, recounting her story one last time, before introducing April, who would screen a short documentary on the movement's progress. She spoke plainly, honestly. "I used to whisper in hospital hallways. Now I speak from stages. But nothing, And I mean nothing compares to the first time my son looked at me and saw me as his own. From the side of the stage, a curly-headed boy waddled out. He tugged her dress. She turned, startled. He looked up at her, eyes wide, then reached up his arms and said, "Mama." The crowd gasped. Some people cried. Even April, behind the lens, had to lower her camera. That one word, "Mama," made everything real. No paperwork, no scandal, no accusation could bury that moment. No law could deny it. No billionaire could silence it. No system could outmaneuver it. Because truth was standing there, arms outstretched, voice full of recognition. A year later, Ruth Ann received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a small, folded card that read, "You were never wrong. You were just early. The rest of us are finally catching up." She placed it in a drawer beside Ezekiel's first ultrasound, the one she'd finally gotten from a whistleblower technician who'd preserved it all those years. The truth had never been blind. It had simply been ignored by those too afraid to see it. But now the world was looking, and it couldn't look away. How many truths have we ignored just because they came from the wrong mouth? Some stories aren't fiction, they're warnings we ignored for too long. If this one made you feel something, don't